if I was asked what is the number one most difficult Christian behavior that must be assimilated to by catechumens, I would say it's learning to endure yourself. Being patient with failure and not freaking out. Recognizing that you're not a saint, that the Lord is going to make you one, and you may make a lot of progress in the life towards that destination. You may make less and everything in between, depending upon how much you're engaged, but you're not going to make any until you learn to put up with yourself. There's only one virtue that Jesus ascribes by itself salvation to. It's called hypomone in Greek, and it means patient endurance. And for that one alone, he says, the one who has hypomone, the one who endures to the end, will be saved.
Yeah.
You might be a wreck, but if you can endure yourself, keep yourself in the church, keep yourself repenting, and keep getting up, you're going to be saved.
This is Jonathan Pajot. Welcome to the Symbolic World. Hello, everyone. I am overjoyed to be here with Father Josiah Trenham. Many of you who are watching this will have already seen him. Father Josiah is the priest and the pastor of St. Andrew's Orthodox Church in Riverside, California. He's also the head of Patristic Nectar Publications that publish books. They have podcasts, they have videos, and you have probably seen him talking about Orthodoxy and also other subjects all on the social medias. And so, Father Josiah, thank you for talking to me.
Thank you, Jonathan. Very happy to be with you.
And so, Father Josiah and I have seen each other a few times. I've been to his amazing parish. It's astounding what it is that they're able to do. They have a school now, and they're looking towards all kinds of taking over some of the social services that we think of, helping people, doing all kinds of wonderful things, full of families. And there's even like a brewery associated with the church. It's quite an astounding thing. It's quite an astounding thing. Like, I have to say, I feel very inspired by the parish. Another thing that inspires me quite a bit is also to see the effort that Father Josiah and his parish are doing to get through the ethnic problem of Orthodoxy. You know, they're making these beautiful way in which they're joining the music of the different jurisdictions, some Byzantine chants, some Russian chant, and, you know, chants from different traditions kind of joined together. And so Father Josiah has been on the forefront of something that seems to be happening in America, a kind of reawakening of people towards Christianity, and in our case, more specifically towards Orthodoxy. And so, Father Josiah, maybe you can tell us a little bit about when it is that you started seeing this happening in your parish.
Well, thank you, Jonathan. I've been a priest for 31 years. I was ordained in 1993, so I've been trying to fulfill the priest's calling, a portion of which is evangelization. Right? Any decent pastor has to both lead his people towards God and take care of his flock, but also study the culture. This is the tradition of the church, is that priests have to be students both of the scriptures and that which is unchanging, and also of the culture, to form a bridge and to be able to preach the gospel to people. So I have been watching, and I would say that I have seen a number of movements and cycles in these 3+ decades, but the most exciting has been really the last 4 years. So there has been, when I first was converting, this is the late 1980s, the early 1990s, there had been a large movement towards Orthodox Christianity that had been going on for about 20 years. Remember, at this time, from about 1955 on, the great ascendancy of Roman Catholicism, which was just exploding from the turn of the century, from 1890 really until about 1955. People like the great Archbishop Fulton Sheen, who dominated the television. I mean, he was the most watched person in 1955.
Really? Wow.
Yeah, can you believe that? And all he was doing was, he had his little Beretta. He was quite an educated man. He had a PhD from the Louvain. and he would write, theological like lessons on a chalkboard. And he was the #1 watched show. And Hollywood used to send their movies to Archbishop Spellman, Cardinal Spellman in New York City. And if he didn't give the thumbs up, the producers would reconsider or make changes. We can't even imagine that world, but that's what it was. They had, in the 50s, the Catholics had 6 million kids in their schools in this land. Today, they have 1.5 million.
Wow.
A 75% reduction. So something was really going for them in the first half of the 20th century. Mainline Protestantism was strong, but really from the middle of the 50s on, there was a massive kind of over-assimilation to American life. Just imagine President Kennedy, the first Catholic president, when he was being grilled by a mostly Protestant Congress and public, he made it very clear that he would not allow his, religious faith to influence him in his governance. What a bizarre thing to say. I mean, right, you're not going to allow your religious, but that's what he had to say to get elected as a Catholic. But he did it, and that was a major accomplishment for the Latins. But they have been, the multiple scandals, they've been suffering terribly. The Latins have just been tanking the last half century. And the same thing happened with the mainline Protestant churches. So most of the second half of this 20th century, the mainline Protestant churches became very secularized, and many people came into the Orthodox faith. For instance, the man who catechized me had been a very influential Episcopal priest in Los Angeles. In 1977, when the American Episcopal Church began to ordain women, that was it. He left, and he became Orthodox under the late Metropolitan Philip Saliba, who was a tremendous evangelist for Orthodoxy in America during his archbishopric, which was from 1966 until 2014, almost 50 years. He received so many Protestants. When I became Orthodox in 93, I met priest after priest. The vast majority of our priests were converts. They had been Catholic priests, they had been Lutheran pastors, they had been Episcopal priests, and now they were Orthodox. And so that was just the milieu into which I came. After about 10 years, around 2004, that really, the incursion into the Orthodox Church from non-Orthodox clergy really stopped. And the great sense of Orthodoxy coagulating groups together and with the hope of becoming an American Orthodox Church really collapsed around 2004. And since that time, up until COVID, I would say we were in a period of very serious decline. Very serious. All jurisdictions were shrinking, some shrinking more quickly than others. And then, out of the blue, comes the COVID catastrophe. And death shows its face. And the next thing we know, we went from shutting our churches down by order of the state. And here in California, it was really bad. Really bad. Our Governor Newsom, passed orders forbidding us even to sing, like literally regulating singing. Such a catastrophe. He actually was, his orders were refuted 5 times. He lost 5 cases before the Supreme Court before he even acknowledged losing one and loosened things up. Thankfully, in the county where I live, we didn't obey him at all. Our sheriff went before our county supervisors after the first unconstitutional order and said to them, if you think I'm going to support the shutting down of churches and enforce your unconstitutional laws, you have another thing coming. So nothing happened here. We just went on as usual. But since that time, really, since death showed its face, I have seen a massive movement towards the church. I'll give you some numbers. Over the course of my pastorate until COVID, I would have maybe 20 or 25 catechumens. And I considered that pretty good. We worked hard.
That was amazing at the time.
At the time, we were feeling really good about it. But everything's perspective. And we were feeling pretty good. And we were working, constantly praying for more and trying to fulfill our duty to make a bridge to our brethren in our community. And then COVID hit, and it just spiked. And it's continuing. It has shown no sign of stopping. And as of last Pascha, we receive our converts into the Orthodox faith always on Great and Holy Saturday, in the eve of Easter. We had 110 catechumens.
Wow.
62 of them we received into the church. Others needed a little bit more time. But since then, we're back up now to about 95, almost 100. And I suspect we'll be at 120 or 130 by the time that Easter comes. Those numbers just are continuing to increase. And I usually do about 10 or 12 trips every year around the United States to give retreats at different parishes or universities. And everywhere I go, Jonathan, everywhere I go, the numbers are massive. I was just in Ben Lomond 2 days ago. I was in Walla Walla, Washington, a couple days before that. I was in Raleigh, North Carolina before that, and I was in North Royalton, Ohio before that, all like in the last 2 months. And in every one of those places, one had 80 catechumens, one had 54 catechumens. I mean, it's just shocking. Just absolutely shocking.
That's amazing. I mean, some churches I'm seeing, it's like they're doubling, tripling. They don't know. They just, some parishes just finished building their building and they already have outgrown it, you know?
What a great problem. What a great problem.
Great problem, exactly. And so what is your vision? I mean, what do you think? Do you think it's just COVID? Do you think there's something else afoot? Do you think there's, before we started recording, I mentioned how everybody now and their brother is writing a book on re-enchantment. Some people were kind of ahead of the curve. I know Rod Dreher, for example, he's been kind of harping on this subject for several years. But now even Ross Douthat is publishing a book on re-enchantment. So, what do you think there's something spiritually happening at a bigger scale than just, let's say, what's happening in Orthodoxy? What do you see that's going on, Father?
Well, first of all, I should say all of those people published in the books, that's a compliment to you, Jonathan. Many of them have been listening to you, and you've been helping us think about these things for a long time. So it's good that more books are being written and your message is being received. I think a lot of things are going on. Larger issues, both culturally and spiritually. Mm-hmm. So when I say the rise of COVID, it wasn't just the bug, right? It wasn't just the disease. The disease is serious, and especially in a very wealthy, pleasure-loving, self-centered culture, which, forgive me, I'm speaking about the United States. No offense to Canadians, but probably it applies directly to you also.
Right.
The one thing we can't stand thinking about is death. Mm. We just can't. We have no way to process it in our secular culture. Secularism has no answer for death. And so we've hidden it. We've worked for decades to hide death. All of the traditional rituals associated with death, not just for Christians, but even for people of other religions, have all been squelched. People are mostly dying alone, mostly dying in hospitals, and then they disappear. They get, within an hour, usually they're in the hospital basement, in the morgue. Someone calls the mortician, he comes and picks them up and puts them in his basement, charging you $250 a night, more than a nice hotel room. Really, the scandal of the mortuary movement, which is a very recent phenomenon, an $85 billion industry. It is a scandal of immense proportions. We've hidden, and then even our funerals, for a lot of Christian people, funerals don't even involve a body anymore. They're celebrations of life. The person's already been cremated or buried somewhere, more often than not cremated, because of the cost involved these days to bury. It's like buying a new car.
Yeah.
For all of these reasons, we've just kept death away, and there's nothing about COVID in which you could do that. It was too shocking. It was too shocking. On top of that, you had, just prior to COVID, this whole rise of the new atheism, this hokey kind of reassertion of a classical atheism, but very poorly done, very thin. Yeah. But a lot of people bought it because they were so dissatisfied with the declining religious leadership in the West. As I was mentioning, what was happening in the Catholic Church, the grotesque scandals of immense proportions. And I'm not talking about small scandals. The largest Roman Catholic archdiocese in America is here in Los Angeles. 4.4 million members. Archbishop Gomez just signed a an agreement, $880 million settlement, the largest settlement ever for sexual abuse by clergy. And his predecessor, Cardinal Mahoney, was just an absolute scandal and catastrophe for decades. So I think the incredible lack of leadership in the Christian community in America made it easy to think that Christianity was cheap and not very serious. And the new atheists came along. A lot of people bought this. One of the new things about catechumens today in the church is they come and I have them describe their previous religious commitment, or if any. Almost all of them have at least a small stint in atheism.
Which is astounding. It's really astounding to see that. It's like it's atheists coming back to church is what we're seeing.
Yes, yes. So I think the combination of really us being so bad, we had a really terrible second half of the 20th century as far as Christian leadership in our country. If you look at the statistics, for instance, for evangelicals, one of my areas of interest and expertise is marriage. I wrote my doctoral dissertation on marriage in the Church Fathers. And so I'm particularly interested in that. The stats on divorce for evangelical Christians, the divorce rate amongst evangelical Christians is higher than the national average. I mean, what can you do with that? You expect your churches are going to grow when the witness is that poor. It's that poor. So, our Lord says the great apologetic for the growth of the church is Christian love, faithful love. By this, all men will know that you are my disciples. You want to convince them the ultimate apologetic? Have Christ-like love, selfless love. And of course, if you're throwing your spouse out or cheating on your spouse, the witness disappears very sadly.
Yeah, exactly.
It's completely gone. So I think that the declining Christian leadership, the appearance of really grotesque secularism, the breaking forth of COVID, plus all the machinations, all the sudden arising of non-American standards with regards to cultural life, the compromise of free speech, the incredible manipulation by the three-letter agencies. I mean, this is all, for an American, my forefathers came on the Mayflower, literally, Francis Eaton, 1620. My family has been here for a bloody long time. To see this appearance very recently of such non-American forms of being, it's just outrageous. I think all of those things have created this incredible ball that has been rolling down and smashing obstacles that have kept people unwilling to make radical changes in their life. And I think right now, since all of those phony foundations have been knocked out, people are asking bigger questions, much, much bigger questions.
One of the things we're seeing, at least the things I'm noticing, is that it's a preponderance of young men that are converting. I don't know if you've seen the same thing, and what do you think about that? What do you think is going on there?
In my own parish, it is still a majority, but it's only a small majority. But I think you're right. If you look across the West, the majority, the greater majority are men. But I'm very happy with that right now, actually. I'm very happy with that. That doesn't mean that this is going to turn out well. That's a different subject, which I hope we'll talk about. But so far, I mean, we're at the very beginnings of this, I'm hoping. But to see men confronted with a serious, time-tested Christian faith, I'm speaking now just about my own experience as an Orthodox Christian. One of the things that really drew me to Orthodoxy was the sense of solidness, the fact that I wasn't very important in a sense, like my opinions mattered almost nothing. I was told a funny joke when I was first exploring Orthodoxy. The person meant it just as something trite, but it really impacted me. The person said, look, to understand us, you have to understand this joke. He said, how many Orthodox bishops does it take to change a light bulb? And I'm like, what the person's talking about? And then he smiled and he said, change? Now that can be read two ways, right? One is
Yeah.
that in general we don't change, but also sometimes it's just a light bulb.
Yeah, yeah.
It needs to be changed, right? It needs to be changed. So sometimes we're not on the cutting edge of good things because we have that mentality.
Yeah,
But I was really impressed with that. The idea, when I was a Presbyterian, I was born and raised a Presbyterian. When I was a Presbyterian seminarian, I was being licensed by my local body of pastors. It's called the Presbytery. And you get tested. You have to defend, your faith and get the acceptance of the other pastors in order for you to get a license to preach. And so when I went before them and I was confessing my faith, I brought the standard, which was the Westminster Confession of Faith. And they asked me, do you want to make any exceptions to this? I said, well, actually I do. And they said, well, tell us what they are. So I told them all 15 exceptions, things I disagreed with, mostly because of Orthodoxy. I had been studying Orthodoxy. I wasn't yet ready to become Orthodox. One of them was not giving communion to infants. Mm-hmm. So Presbyterians don't do that in general, and so I took an exception. And they ended up approving me and licensing me nonetheless, even though one of my theology professors at seminary had been sick. And he came to see me the Monday after I got licensed on the weekend. And he told me, if I was there, you never would have got licensed.
He said, I know what you really think.
Yeah, he said, it never would have happened. But I thought to myself, that's it. That's just it, right? That they want to uphold the standard, but they approve 15 changes, 15 alterations. And, the 16th, the end of the 16th, 17th, and the early part of the 18th century were periods of lots of detailed confessions were written, both by the Catholics and by the Protestants. And the problem with writing all of these detailed confessions is that you say too much.
Yeah.
You say too much, and then you have to revise them. And then where do you stop? What can you throw out? What do you have to keep? I went to a Protestant, evangelical Protestant liberal arts college in Santa Barbara called Westmont. Really loved my time there. And they had kind of the standard, at the time, Protestant confession of faith. Some years after, maybe 20 years after I graduated, I got an email, as everyone did from the school, from the president, informing us that they were changing their statement of faith. And it went from this very long, detailed statement to very short, 4 paragraphs, but not the 4 paragraphs of the Nicene Creed.
Right.
Right, their own 4 paragraphs. And I thought to myself, if you were a founder, people put their life savings into starting this university. And if they thought that in 40 years, 50 years, the leadership was going to gut what they considered to be basic Protestantism and invent something very kind of new and simplistic, what would they have said? Are they going to give their money to that? Mm-hmm. That kind of phenomena in the Western Protestant world is so thin that I think people, young men especially, are seeing Orthodoxy and its unwillingness to budge on matters of the faith. I remember I told people when I first got ordained as an Orthodox priest, I was so happy because if I stood up and preached and I said something that was untraditional, something that was not creedal, the old ladies in my church literally would have come. They would have grabbed me by the ear and they would have just walked me out of the door. That would have been the last time I preached. They didn't need the bishop. They would have called them for sure. But they would have taken care of me. They would have taken care of me themselves.
Yeah, there are canons in some of the later Russian synods that say exactly that. They say if a priest in your parish says something which is not traditional, kick him out. You don't wait for the bishop. It's pretty funny.
Tie him up and throw him in the Bosphorus.
Yeah, there you go. And so one of the things too that how can I say this? One of the things that your parish has done well is also paid very much attention to beauty, both in terms of the music, but also in terms of the icons. For those who don't know, there's a little chapel at Father Josiah's church that just has some of the most splendid painted icons I've seen in North America, to be honest. Beauty's expensive, Father. It's difficult and it's expensive. Why are you putting so much effort into that aspect in your parish?
This is our way. This is the way of the church. Just think of the widow's mite. think of Mary when she broke that, $10,000 vase of sacred ointment on our Savior, and the apostles were scandalized. Why'd you do that? Why such an extravagant act of devotion when that money could have been better used elsewhere? I think our commitment historically to building the most splendid buildings and always making them better than anything else is a measurement of a love for God. The church is for God and it's for the people. And if we're going to we look at all these people who are rich and they have fancy houses. That doesn't scandalize us.
Yeah.
But Christians meet in gymnasiums. I mean, what's the message there? You need beauty for yourself, but the church can just be ugly? No, I don't think so. I think it's a measure of devotion, which is why for 2,000 years, as soon as we could, for the first 3 centuries in most parts of the Roman Empire, if there was a military garrison near, you could not build because you would be arrested and punished. The only archaeological remains that we have of churches before the Edict of Milan in 312 are on the outskirts, near Armenia and places like that, where there weren't soldiers to kill us. And even then, we met in the best houses, and we did our best to make them beautiful. We had beautiful vessels in the first 3 months. We had beautiful tapestries. We had beautiful painted gospel books. We had beautiful crosses, but we just didn't have any churches because it was impossible. But it was like a compressed spring. And as soon as we were legalized, as soon as Emperor Constantine began to give our properties back and allowed us to actually have assets, it was like the spring just exploded. And we commandeered great Roman buildings, and we made them explicitly Christian. We took these great basilicas, and we made them gorgeous. And then in the 6th century, we invented the expanse dome, and that changed everything.
Yeah.
And we've always had this commitment to the sacred arts, architecture, sacred music, iconography, wood carving, all of those for the glory of God. And this is just the church's way. When I was becoming Orthodox, one of the things that really drew me was the sacred arts of the church. I remember when I was in seminary, as I was mentioning earlier, as a Presbyterian, there was a new Orthodox church just down the road that was built. And I used to drive by it all the time and just watch the architecture going up. And they had put in new icons, and I was too timid actually to go in. But they left the doors open often, so I would just go out and look through the doors. I had some sense that if I went in, it was over for me. It was over for me. And sure enough, as soon as I did start going in, I went in for Great Vespers eventually, and that was it. I would always go on Saturday nights and still go to my Protestant church. But very quickly, I looked at my wife. I said, "Sweetheart, why am I so motivated to go to Great Vespers every Saturday night? Way more than I want to go to church on Sunday morning." And the beauty just grabbed me.
And I mean, of course, I agree with you. I asked that question, but I totally agree with you, that, or else I wouldn't have done what I did for so many years. But there is, I think, also, there's that contrast, the contrast that's related to the situation with COVID, this extreme loneliness, this facing of death, and also facing of tyranny at the same time. Like this contrast of what true organic, organized liturgical community looks like. I think it's the same with beauty. Our neighborhoods are mostly ugly. If some of our neighborhoods aren't so bad, then for sure go to the shopping districts, these strip malls, and the highways and all this. There's a kind of ugliness about our world that when you go to Europe and you go to the old towns in Europe, you realize just how ugly we've accepted at how ugly the world is. And so the draw of something absolutely, unapologetically beautiful, I think, like you said, there's a kind of powerful strength in that, but it's not for our sake. You could make a big gilded something for whatever, but when it's dedicated to God, there's a sense in which it's like, well, who is this? Who did this to their own glory? It's like, well, no, it's not to anybody's glory around here. Yeah. It's dedicated to Saint Andrew. It's dedicated to God. And because of that, it feels like we can almost. It makes how can I say this? Like, it makes certain things that if you put them in your house, it would actually be completely unacceptable. Like if you did so much luxury in your own house, it would almost be a scandal. But because it's dedicated to God, we can just smile and
Yeah.
and enjoy, you know.
You're right. I don't think there's anything selfish about it. It's for the glory of God. It reveals heaven, so it's also a witness about what our future is. It's a huge shot of encouragement into the hearts of everyone who comes. This is why when we come into the church, it's one of the reasons. There's many other reasons. We literally are altered. We come in, our hearts are changed, our minds are uplifted, even physically, if we're sick, we feel better when we're in the community, when we're in church. It is, of course, a heavenly realm where heaven and earth mixes. There are angels present, there are saints present, but the beauty is overwhelming and sanctifying and healing. And it's the revelation of heaven, but it's also for us. It's also so normalizing, and it makes all of the divisions of society come into a sense of harmony. You know, the rich and the poor are the same in the church. Everyone has the same access. Everyone has the same experience. Doesn't matter if you have a lot of resources or not. You could be a general in the army, and some new recruit comes in, and you kiss each other and talk to each other by your first name. Yeah. When you come to the chalice and when you greet each other in the midst of the church. So it's so uplifting. It's so absolutely magnificent. It has nothing to do with self-centeredness. I remember reading an article recently, I mean, maybe it was a couple of years ago, about an archaeological dig in Rome. And they found, Emperor Nero, the insane, he used to have this big ballroom, and he had a rotating floor, a massive rotating floor, and he had a massive statue of Apollo, carved statue. And at the top, Apollo's head was him.
Of course.
It was Nero, right? So they found that. And I thought to myself, okay, so that's his icon, right? His self-glorification effort, self-deification effort. And the Romans were into that, right? They loved doing that for their emperors. And they wanted us to go along with it. We're like, no. We're not going to bow down to you. We're not going to light the incense before these emperors. But that's not because we were against it, against the idea. No, we're against it's the wrong person. Put Christ's face there, and we're there. Absolutely. We're there. It makes perfect sense to us. And that, I think, is what we're expressing in the church, worship of the church. It's a great love gift of him who is worthy.
Yeah. I mean, I think it's wonderful because the excesses of Nero right now, think about like the excesses of Nero, of the emperor there in the day, but now we have those types of excesses, but for private citizens, or there are people who have that type of excess in the private world, people that have absolutely no responsibility to the public. At least Nero had to pretend like he was actually kind of responsible for the people there. And so we are in this weird contradictory world where luxury is actually abundantly available to people more than ever, but the people don't have any responsibility. And so the church, I think, also, once again, becomes such a bulwark to that in saying, okay, yes, we actually, in North America, we are the richest, civilization in the history of the world. And so why can't we make beautiful churches? It's so hard for us to I mean, some people are doing it. Obviously, you're doing it. There are other examples of it. But so many people feel like this is impossible to them, despite the fact that luxury is so abundant to us,
Yes. It's a representation, I think, of a little bit of our worldliness in the church, which we need to correct, right? We need to repent. The idea that any parishioner is going to live in a house that's more expensive than our church building, that's just impossible. Impossible. And for us to call our people, also our whole view of dispossession, this is very hard for us Americans. For us, the temptation is if you think God loves you, that you're going to have, everything's going to go well. You're going to be blessed. You're going to have, money flowing in. You give him your tithe, and he's going to open the windows of heaven and put money in your pockets, baby. It's going to be so great. This is the mentality.
Yeah, that's right.
And that's not the church teaching of the church. For us, to be wealthy means that you have no expectations and wants. You can have very few dollars in the bank, and you can be exceedingly wealthy if you don't want anything. And if you have a lot of money, but you always want more, you're a pauper. You're a poor man. I call it the golden handcuffs. There's so many people who have a lot of money in our land, but they just never have anything to give because they increase what they think they need proportionally to their income. So they're always strapped. They're always in debt.
Yeah, I've seen that for sure. People, it's like as soon as they can increase their debt level, they just increase their debt and they live, like up to here in debt constantly, and they have nice things. But, just the worry of that is so detrimental to your soul, to have to be basically a slave to that debt. Wow. That's true that's such a modern phenomenon.
Yeah, and it's epidemic in our culture, right? I mean, I was shocked. It's amazing to me that in America, when I was young, the Republicans were all about balancing the budget. I mean, that was one of their absolute non-negotiable principles. And they, of course, would just tell everybody what we all knew. If you spend more than you make, you're going to go into debt and you're going to ruin your life. We all understand what it means personally, in an individual level with credit cards. But nationally, in the last, 10 or 15 years, no one talks about it. Neither the Democrats nor the Republicans. No one has a plan for it. And the Democrats and the Republicans are exactly the same. They're all going to blow through our money. We started using the word trillion like we used to use billion, like we used to use million. Now we have a $35 trillion deficit. I saw even President Trump recently interviewed before the election about how he was going to balance the budget. And I've heard him speak about this before, so I wasn't expecting much. And when he spoke, he didn't give much. He said, well, when you think about $35 trillion and that interest on our debt is now our third line item, we spend more on the interest on our debt than we spend on the military, which is saying something in America because we spend so much money on the military. And his answer was, well, you have to remember what our assets are, how much oil we have under the earth. And I thought to myself, oh, terrible. I only received encouragement when Elon Musk came along and said that he had convinced President Trump to hire him as an efficiency czar, and that he was convinced that he could remove $2 trillion from the annual budget. When I heard that, I thought, Lord, thank you, because that's exactly how much we're over budget. 2 trillion is how much every year for like the last 4 years we have been over budget. If Elon can actually do that and help us to recover basic sense that you don't spend more than you make. I mean, it's so basic. A 10-year-old knows this. But
it's astounding that we went from, in some ways, the idea that borrowing or lending on credit was like a sin. It was like you had to go to confession, and now it's actually the way that it works. The whole system works based on, it's basically a big usury system. That's such an example of, moving away from Christianity and how rapidly some of the consequences of that are not the ones you would have thought at the outset, but, end up in this situation, like you said, where you're basically servicing your debt at the highest level of your budget. What happens when, the servicing the debt of the country, becomes the number one item? What happens when it's higher than your GDP? Like, I don't know what limit there is, for this to go. Who knows?
Plus increase in medical costs, an aging population, less taxpayers putting their money in because people aren't having kids. I mean, it is a recipe for disaster.
It seems. So I want to ask you a question. That one of the things we've seen in the return to the church is people call them Orthobros. I don't personally like the term, but there is definitely something that I'm seeing is that a lot of the people coming into the church they're very heady. Like they have an intellectual. And so for the good, you could say, because it's pretty amazing to have, intellect. Usually in the past, people who would come to the church, it was often, personal crises, right? It's like you lose someone, you go through a very difficult time, and then God kind of reaches out to you. But now we have people that are coming in through a search for meaning, and therefore they're also quite heady, and sometimes amazingly, but sometimes also with great difficulty. Like they come in with all these ideas, and so I'm wondering how you see that, and kind of how you deal with that question.
I share your perception of what's happening, and I thank God I thank God for the level of Orthodox books, excellent pedagogical instruction about life in general. None of this existed when I became Orthodox. When I became Orthodox, very few Orthodox books. One of my oldest parishioners, who I just buried 2-3 years ago, she converted in 1963. There were 3 books that her priest could give her in English. 3 books, and they were small.
That's amazing.
Today we have tens of thousands of Orthodox books. They're not all, quality, but certainly we have an abundance of catechetical material. And it's important. The mind has to be engaged. It's very important. But that's the beginning. That's just the beginning. And I always tell my catechumens, it's not just the beginning, that's the easy part.
Yeah.
It's the easy part. Now you have to transfer that thought into your heart and into your behavior. And this is why getting involved in a serious catechetical program is very important. And a catechetical program is not just an informational program. Of course, priests are going to teach the faith. They're going to teach who God is, what a human being is, what sin is, who Jesus is, what Jesus has done to save us, who the Holy Spirit is, and how he'll inspire your life and connect you to God, what the church is, what repentance is, what faith is, who are the saints. I mean, this is all constituent elements in a catechism. That's basic. But just as important is coming to the services, learning how to stand in the presence of God, learning how to fast, learning how to feast. Those both have to be learned. Learning how to forgive, that's a huge issue and very, very important. And of course, the church has whole services designed to teach us how to do that. Learning how to listen and follow. Obtaining a father confessor, that's a big deal.
Yeah.
Having an accountability, it's of course a great blessing too, because you have an unbelievable support that you never thought you would ever have, to have a father confessor. Learning to relate to a bishop, learning to relate to a priest, learning to have elders in your life. This is also one of the gifts of the church. When young men come especially to the church, they get a family. They all the old ladies in the church and all the old men, they become their aunts and uncles. And in reality, I mean, we actually believe in the reality of spiritual relationships that are constituted in baptism and by sharing a common chalice, that are just as real, sometimes more real than our biological and relations. All of that takes time, which is why catechism absolutely cannot be done quickly. Assimilation takes time, and submersion, and is a lot more than just thoughts in the head. Yeah. And I'll tell you, if I was asked what is the number one most difficult Christian behavior that must be assimilated to by catechumens, I would say it's learning to endure yourself. This is being patient with failure and not freaking out, recognizing that you're not a saint, that the Lord is going to make you one, and you may make a lot of progress in the life towards that destination. You may make less, and everything in between, depending upon how much you're engaged, but you're not going to make any until you learn to put up with yourself. There's only one virtue that Jesus ascribes by itself salvation to. It's an amazing reality. He, of course, hymns so many virtues and teaches us so many virtues, not just by his behavior, but by his own pedagogy. But there's one that's unique, and that is, it's called hypomone in Greek, and it means patient endurance. And for that one alone, he says, the one who has hypomone, the one who endures to the end, will be saved.
Yeah.
You might be a wreck, but if you can endure yourself, keep yourself in the church, keep yourself repenting, and keep getting up, you're going to be saved.
Yeah. I think, Father, that's amazing, because I've obviously experienced that myself, especially coming from the context where I came from, some strain of Protestantism that I came from. I remember a pastor once saying in church, Christians don't sin anymore. And it was like, and he said, at least we don't practice sin. That was the thing he said. He said, we sin occasionally, but we don't practice sin. And I was sitting there, whatever I was, like 19 years old. And I was looking at him like, well, I don't know what to say, because obviously this is, so I guess I'm going to go to altar call every week. It'll be like my Protestant version of confession, because I definitely sin all the time. And there's this sense in which, the kind of way we beat ourselves up sometimes morally is actually because we think we're better than we are. It's like we think like, how could I do that? I should be a saint.
I agree.
Yeah, and that's what I've learned, I think, through confession is, because the thing about confession, people who haven't practiced it, especially if you try to do it, often, I'll have to be honest with you, as I travel, I don't go to confession as much as I should these days, but there are moments in my life where I've gone to confession as much as possible, and you just keep saying the same thing. And so you're like, wow, and so you realize I am nothing. Like, I really can't do this. There's, and then the surprise, at least sometimes, is that at some point something happens that you don't totally know what it is, through prayer, just through going to church, through going to communion. You're like, oh, wait a minute, this is actually this thing that I used to confess every week. All of a sudden, it's gone, or it's almost not there anymore. What happened? And this is the sense in which you see that God is working through us, without even. We obviously have to make efforts, but God is always working, sometimes even in the moments when you think that you're lost and nothing you're doing is working, and you just keep falling and falling. God is still working.
Yes. Yeah. I love that text that the Lord Jesus quotes from the Old Testament and applies to us, where he says that God resists the proud, but he gives grace to the humble. Humility is so beautiful. It's so beautiful. And the church is, by asking us to keep our eyes on ourselves and not upon others, or in St. Paul's language, to esteem other people as more important than ourselves. Jesus modeled, of course, putting a towel around our waist and washing people's feet, esteeming them that highly. That brings grace like a magnet into someone's life. And the more that we can learn to endure ourselves and not make up stories about who we are or how much we've progressed, not looking down on other people, the more that we can avoid doing that, the more that we can become more settled in the grace of God, because he pours out his grace upon people who choose to take the humble position. And that is the most secure position of all. It's only when we raise ourselves up that we get insecure. It's when we lift ourselves up, then we can fall. If we can keep ourselves low, there's no place to fall. We're spiritually crawling on the ground and we're looking up towards people. It's so peaceful and it's so safe, and it keeps us from falling into the horrible position of judgment. One of the things I'm trying to convince converts of constantly is that when you see something terrible, you see something that's a lie or dark, and how can you live one day in our culture and not see those things all the time? You have a choice right then what you're going to do when you see it. How are you going to respond to this? If you choose to point at it and to criticize it, to judge it, what you're doing right there is collaborating with the one that we call in the scriptures the diabolos, the one who points the finger. You're actually collaborating with Satan himself, or with a demon, in actually promoting a spirit of darkness on the land. The scripture says that Jesus did not come into the world to judge the world, but that the world might be saved through him. And yet he is the judge. If he wanted to exercise his judgment, he could have done that. But he didn't. He wanted to save us, not judge us. And so we have the better choice when we see something that's terrible every day. I think we can do two beautiful things. One is we can collaborate with Jesus in bringing grace and salvation to someone's life. So when you see something terrible going on, you can lift up your mind and you can say, Lord, look on this person. Open some spout in heaven and cause grace to come down upon them, because they're in great need right now. Send your mercy to them right now and save them from this catastrophe. Then you're actually collaborating. And the second good thing to do is be convinced that God only allows his children to see horror so that they can discern some portion of that horror in them. Whatever we see, in some way, it's in us. And if we turn from what we see and say, Lord, I know that's in me too, please get it out. Get it out. Those are two very gracious, grace summoning actions that would collaborate with Jesus in bringing grace to the whole world, which is what we're about. Mm-hmm. We want every single person, Jonathan. I want every person on planet Earth to be baptized, to have their sins washed away, to have God come and live in them, to be established in peace forever, so that they can live a beautiful life. This is the Christian vision. We're interested in everyone. We want everyone, and this is our task.
Yeah. Kind of change the subject here all over, because there's a bunch of stuff that I was wanting to get your opinion on. One of the things that we're seeing, and you mentioned that a little bit, is, you mentioned how the people that come to church have some atheist aspect to them. The sense that I also have is that there are also a lot of people going into all these weird religious directions. We have the spiritually not religious, and everybody has their own little kind of new age version of spirituality or something. And I'm wondering if you're seeing in your own parish people that have gone in that direction kind of coming back, and how do you account for that? Or what is it that you're seeing? What is it that's touching these people?
I think I understand the question you're raising, and it does exist. The reenchantment, right, isn't always finely tuned theologically.
No, that's for sure.
So we have, if you come to my parish, you're going to see, what shall I say, a collection of tattoos.
Yeah, that's
from
true. I never thought about that.
Norse gods, witches' covens. People have tried these things, they've just, I look on it and, forgive me, but it was an improvement. It was an improvement. If you look at the ancient pagan world, forgive me, the ancient pagan world was a lot better than our secular society. I'm sorry, so much better in many measurable ways. How they treated the unborn, even though they were terrible compared to Christian standards, way better than what we do. How they treated marriage. I mean, many Roman men had mistresses, but they also took care of their wives. They also knew that they had to support their children, or else society would collapse. People weren't giving up having kids. No one was that stupid. The pagans were a lot smarter than us. They had bad gods. I mean, I'll give it to you. But at least they believed in the divine and supernatural realm. They knew that they owed something to that realm. They knew that they were accountable to that realm. The idea that today our people think that really, that despite all the evidence that every society in the history of the human race has recognized as evidence of the divine, now all of a sudden it's not there? I mean, how stupid do you have to be? So I've told people, look, you can't call people today pagans. That's a compliment that they don't deserve. They don't deserve that compliment. It's not nice at all. I tell them, especially, and I've had quite a bit of, what shall I say, a little wrestling, a little interaction with the LGBT community.
Yeah.
And this is an area, I think, of particular evidence. So there is no precedent for the sexual chaos and anarchy of our current time. There is no precedent historically. The best you can do if you're a gay man is to look to the Greeks, look to the pagan Greeks. But even there's nothing that parallels what's going on today. Yeah. I mean, the relationship of older men with younger men, the sexual dalliances in Greek pagan culture, yeah, they existed. But it was very clear that these did not involve that putting aside of marriage. Many of these men had their wives and they had their children. I'm not saying that they were being good to them, but they didn't think you can just dispose of marriage. You can just dispose of family life and everything is going to be okay. That is not true. And they also were the Greeks were 100% opposed to the unnatural reality, forgive me for being so graphic, of anal sex. That was verboten in Greek society. I don't want to go into it too much because your listeners might be scandalized, but they had other ways, if you understand what I'm saying. But it didn't involve that. That was considered the breaking of the vessel, the breaking of you, like you're hurting yourself, you're going to destroy yourself. And that's the only precedent that really can be appealed to. We are so off the rails in continuity with previous human generations that, what can I say? We've lost our minds. We really lost our minds. So there is some, in some way, if people get involved in crazy religious experience, it's probably better than secular atheism.
Mm-hmm. All right. So I have to ask the question that follows this, obviously, is one of the things that has been in my circles, and it's something that I didn't expect. And at first I didn't even know how to react because it was so far from my own world, was the whole psychedelics thing, right? And so, my friend Jordan Peterson talks about psychedelics, and then other people that I've met, actually, Father, this is because I never thought about that ever before. And so all of a sudden I'm meeting people in my own parish that tell me they've converted because of psychedelics. But then I also meet people that have had absolute psychoses and have lost their mind because of psychedelics. And so you live in California. And so I imagine that you have to deal with this.
What are you trying to say?
As a priest, you probably have to deal with that. And so I'm curious to hear what you think and what your advice is to people that are asking themselves this question about these substances.
My experience is very similar to what you're describing. There are, in fact, plenty of cases in which, under the influence, the Lord himself appears and can pull someone towards him. But that doesn't mean that the event itself is wise or justifiable. And just as often as not, the exact opposite happens, which is a terrifying reality. That doesn't mean that a terrifying reality can't catapult someone into sobriety. I think that's what's happening. I've noticed recently, I watched that clip from Tucker Carlson about him being attacked by a demon. Did you see that?
Yeah. I knew about that story actually for a while, but I didn't think he would talk about it in public. Yeah.
Yeah. I didn't know about it, but I presumed it just by his awakening, I would say.
His change, transformation.
Yeah, there's been and I think it's broadly across our culture, is that the darkness has appeared, and that has awakened people to the reality of the unseen world. And as sad as it is, they're actually helping us. C.S. Lewis in his Screw Tape Letters talks a lot about how the demons scheme to be unseen, because if they can keep people believing that there is no supernatural world, they've got them exactly where they want to be. So they don't want to do anything that's too, shocking. That might waken them up to the unseen world. And now that's very much the case today, is that so many crazy things are happening, spiritually speaking, that fewer and fewer people are maintaining the fiction that there is nothing unseen. Whether they're going to come full circle to a Christian position, an Orthodox position, which is that the unseen world is the primary and most important world, and that it itself gives meaning to the visible world. That bifurcation, which is right in our creed, right? We say, I believe in one God, the Father Almighty, maker of heaven and earth and of all things visible and invisible. That bifurcation is very important in Christian theology. And I always tell people, look, the obsession with the physical, which inspires our culture, especially our education, STEM, everything's STEM. I always laugh. I'm always poking fun at my own parishioners, who are so many of whom are academics. I'm always poking fun because I'm like, that's great and all. I mean, I support medicine, technology, engineering. It's all great. It's all wonderful. But nobody dies for that stuff. That all the most important things in life are unseen.
That's
all
right.
The most important things are invisible. God, the soul, love, truth. These are the things that you die for. These are the things that give you motivation to get up and go to your engineering job. If you don't have the invisible, what do you care about the physical?
Yeah.
Nobody cares. But today it's just the opposite. Everybody's acting like STEM is just this great thing and so important in society. No. Read philosophy, read books, find out about your soul.
Yeah, and I think you're right. I kind of see it as there's a constellation of things peeking in. Like there's a constellation of things. There's these people going into all these new age kind of practices, people who are doing psychedelics. There's also this obsession with the UFOs and supernatural. People are also obsessed again with like hauntings, and they're obsessed with astrology, which like I didn't expect that. You know, all of a sudden, my daughter, she said all her friends, all the teenagers, they love astrology. They just talk about astrology.
Reading their horoscopes.
Yeah, exactly. Everybody's reading their horoscope, which is, you know, which shows you that just in the popular culture, things are shaking. Like the materialism isn't enough. And so people are grasping at all these sometimes ridiculous or at least incomplete, ways of doing it. Sometimes they're also kind of materialistic. The UFO one is, to me, often seems to be a desire to encapsulate any type of experience into materialistic, categories. But then all of this is showing us that there's a kind of, there are fissures in the wall, like things are kind of cracking, and that the future is going to be religious. It seems that that's the case, and so the question is rather what is that going to look like? And at least I know in the long term what it's going to look like. I know in the long term Christ wins, like there's no doubt about that. But at least in the short term, and even AI too, that whole idea of AI, of how this desire to kind of build an intelligent machine that will influence us. All of that is our symptoms of the same thing that's happening in our society. Yeah.
I share your sentiment.
Have you thought about the AI thing? I don't know. I'm just asking you because it's just everybody. It's just happening everywhere. What is your perception of that? What do you think of the AI thing?
Wow.
Ask you. Am I the only one who's ever asked you that, Father Josiah, in public?
One of my catechumens is employed as an ethicist for artificial intelligence, for a big tech company, and we collaborated a bit. Matter of fact, we contemplated. There's a big conference going on. Actually, I think it's going on this month, end of this month in Athens, and we submitted a joint proposal to talk a little bit about ethics and artificial intelligence. I begged out of it, much to my happiness. My traveling is driving me crazy.
Yeah,
absolutely crazy. Just can't do it. But this is, whether we want to think about it or not, it is apparently upon us. How can we not think about it? I have a spiritual son who's doing his PhD in Byzantine studies at a big university, I won't say where, here in America. And he's TAing right now some graduate classes. And he's been giving, he gave a test recently to his grad students on some aspect of Byzantine history, very complex aspect, like between the 12th and the 14th century, very neglected portion of Christian history, which means that the AI resources for that are very limited.
Are thin, yeah.
Yeah, they're very thin. And so this is a way that he discovered that even top level, this is a very top level university in America, graduate class, he got a paper back that was just superb. It was perfect, except it made no reference to any of the Greek texts that he had these grad students read that were not popularly in the English language. And he asked in his, requirements for the paper that they reference these texts. Well, when the paper was turned in, there were no references to the text. So he knew immediately this was a fake paper. And he went to the head of the department at the university to ask what should he do. He said, this is a perfect paper, but it's a complete fake. And the professor said, who was head of the department, said, I agree with you. It's clearly the case, and there's not a thing we can do about it. They don't have the apparatus to address it. And it would be a he says, she says thing, and very hard to prove. But that is catastrophically horrific. People are now able to fake their intelligence by a dependence on ChatGPT or something else. And what is that going to mean when we need competence in human beings? And you don't have access to your phone to make a fake paper.
Yeah, it's definitely a wild time. It's it's an amazing resource. Like I use ChatGPT because, I mean, you can have if you have actually sometimes very esoteric questions, very difficult questions, especially the new versions, they just give it to you. It's quite astounding. But at the same time, it is in some ways, the problem that Plato brought about in the Phaedra, right? This problem of the exteriorization of memory and the exteriorization of thought. And so, like you said, at some point, the only skill that will be useful for humans is the capacity to use the AI. Like that's the skill that you'll have to develop. It won't be to actually learn anything. It'll just be like, are you good? It's kind of like now, it's like, are you good at searching on Google? That's what it was for a while. That's what made you smart. And now it'll just be, are you capable of using the GPT? Yeah, so I think one of the things it might do, interesting enough, Father, is that it might bring us back to old school stuff. Like you'll be in the class with a pencil and a piece of paper, and then it'll be like, I'm sorry, but anything you do right now is going to be from your own memory, or else it doesn't count. And then people will be forced to actually make efforts that they didn't have to make even 10 years ago to prove that they know what they know. So
are we going to have to go through the pain, though? Are we going to have to go through the pain first and then recalibrate? I just wonder, do
we ever do anything in any other way, Father? Like,
well said. I have these two marvelous priests here who work with me. There's the three of us at the parish who work full time, and they're younger priests and they're far more technologically savvy than I. And one particularly has been working from a priest perspective with ChatGPT, and he's been showing all sorts of things about, I'm giving this talk to this kind of group. I need high-level Byzantine graphics. I want to emphasize especially these church fathers. And, he's been walking us through the creation of these incredible presentations that you're able to make if you know how to ask the right questions and to lead the intelligence the way that you want. But I looked at him and I said, after he showed this to me, I said, never use that. It's going to stunt you. It's going to stunt you. So you're going to miss, a priest speaks from his experience and he wrestles with the scriptures and he wrestles with the saints that he reads. And you develop relationships with them. I mean, you pray when you're reading St. John Chrysostom's text, right? You're praying to the saint. You're asking him to help you. You're entering into his life. And it's satisfying. It's the same with the scriptures. When you're interacting, you're asking for the Spirit's illumination. If we miss all of that, the whole process of discovery, the whole process of learning, it's so deeply human and so deeply satisfying. We're going to be so sad. We're going to feel terrible.
Yeah. Father, so we're kind of coming up on time very soon. I want to ask you, I guess, one last question. It's a two-part question. In some ways, I'd like to get your intuition about what's coming, Let's say, I know I don't want you to feel pressured, but, I think that I've seen you as a very intuitive person as well. And so I'd like you to give us a sense. The election was rough for America and people's perception of themselves and people's perception of what's actually happening in the world. There's a big divide in your country, but also here in Canada. We're seeing that divide appear. There's all this searching that people have, and it's leading people into all kinds of directions. And so I would like to ask you kind of at least a little bit what you see, and also what's your advice for the young people, especially the young people that are watching, and that they want to know how to be in the world and where to look.
What a question. There are two important symbols that everyone should have in the forefront of their mind, and they should have them in the proper order. The cross and your nation's flag, in my mind. Those are two very, very important symbols. And for Christian people, it's very important to have them in the proper order. To be a parishioner, to be a Christian, and to belong to a church, to become a parishioner, that word comes from a beautiful Greek word, parikos, which means sojourner. There's an incredible letter, an epistle that's usually bound in our books on the Apostolic Fathers. It's called the Epistle to Diognetus. It's an incredible text. It's anonymous. We don't know who the author is, but sometime probably around 200, 150 to 200. And he describes the disposition of Christians, and he says, Christians consider every foreign land to be a home country and every home country to be a foreign land. Mm-hmm. And of course, that's a biblical concept, right? When God called Abraham out of the polytheism from Ur of the Chaldees, right, ancient Mesopotamia, a very developed culture, he called them to walk out. And for the rest of his life, following God, he was a sojourner, and he built altars, and he erected and established worship as the foundation of his life. He fulfilled civic duties. You know, he had good relationships with his neighbors. Sometimes he even went to war for good purposes, but he never was acting like his earthly attachments were the most important. Mm-hmm. He was looking, St. Paul says in his epistle to the Hebrews, he was looking for a city whose architect and builder is God, an eternal city. I think that we Orthodox Christians prosper when we keep those relations distinct, the cross supreme, and the flag second, and we have duties, of course, to our nation. We love our nation, but we never put the flag above the cross. Mm-hmm. When we do, we die. We die. And that's been my experience in Orthodoxy in America. When we emphasize our nationalism above the gospel, we trivialize ourselves, and we're disappearing, and we shrink. And we should shrink because we're not being good Christians. Mm-hmm. When we exalt the cross above the flag, we have a proper relationship to the flag. You have certain patriotic duties. You love your country. Of course, this is your ground that God made you from. I'm not denying any of that. I'm patriotic myself, very much so. I love my country. But I love God more. And I love his kingdom more. And I evaluate my nation according to his standards. I try to make a contribution according to what is unchanging. I feel very uncertain about our earthly scenario right now. If you ask me, I'm uncertain if President Trump is even going to make it to inauguration. Mm-hmm. That's how uncertain I am. The things that are going down in our land are so outrageous. They're so outrageous. These assassination attempts, the amount of manipulation, of deceit that is just in the heart of our existence. It's completely sobered me. It's completely sobered me such that every day I don't know what to expect. I'm hoping for the best. I'm hoping that this will be the beginning of a major reorientation. I think it's possible. A major social reorientation in which there can be a return to the importance of religion, the importance of morality. This is one of the most grotesque expressions of contemporary life. In 2003, the late Supreme Court Justice here, Antonin Scalia, he issued a minority opinion in this case called Lawrence versus Texas, which was an LGBT staged case to strike down anti-sodomy laws, which used to be so normal in America, and they still were on the books in Texas. When he wrote his minority opinion going against the majority of the Supremes who did strike down these anti-sodomy laws, he said, this is the end of morals legislation in America. And if you don't have morality inspiring your legislation, what is? It's the end of justice. He could have written that just as easily. If morality is not undergirding your law code, then you do not have a just law code. And that is us now. That is us. So I think that doesn't take a great theologian to articulate. I mean, that's so basic. It's so normal. You can't abandon morality. It's inescapable. You either have an articulated, true morality, or you have something made up. And who's making it up? Whoever's making it up is the God of the nation. Mm-hmm. I mean, you go up the moral law to the author, and then you have the God of the nation. If it's not from God, it's not Jesus. Who is it exactly? that kind of religious chaos, and I look at it even religiously speaking, one of the things that's fascinated me is on the Trump side, you have this collection of Hindus. It's mind-blowing. They're very attractive to me. I mean, J.D. Vance's wife is a Hindu. Vivek Ramaswamy is a Hindu. We have, of course, Kamala Harris claims to, have this background as well. We have all this, the rise of Hinduism, which is full-blown polytheism. And are we, that doesn't matter? That's not going to have an impact on what we think about justice or what we think about the dignity of a human person? Ultimately, I'm hoping that part of this radical readjustment in our society will lead us back to some basic, rock solid, you can acknowledge God, you must acknowledge God, even if it's in some way that's, more generic compared to an Orthodox, fine. But to acknowledge God, to acknowledge the Ten Commandments, to acknowledge the existence of morality, this seems so basic to me, and I just can't imagine if we continue down this path of pretending that none of this exists, it's going to end well.
Well, Father, thank you for your time, and thank you for everything you're doing, for your witness, and also for showing us, what's possible, even at a parish level, for people who at least try to put, the right, let's say, the right order of priorities, the beauty and also the dedication. I mean, when I was at your parish, I think one of the things I could see on everybody's face was just this, like, this is my home, and you can feel that in the way that people are with their kids crawling around, and it's really astounding. And so thank you for everything you do, and I hope we can also talk again very soon, Father.
Please keep enchanting us, Jonathan. Please keep enchanting us.
Thanks, Father. I really appreciate it.